So on the tape, are they coordinating or discussing the assassination of JFK?
But we've had our differences, and I'm a true blue to Lyndon, as I've always been, and tried to carry out every order that he'd ever given me. But this is one I'll probably never be able to forget.
They are openly discussing the assassination of JFK, to some degree what happened, who was behind it, who was involved. I don't know that they're discussing everybody that was involved, but they're certainly pointing the finger at a couple of people.
Like
LBJ and the hitman Malcolm Wallace. He was apparently a brilliant guy, very intelligent, was over, I believe, the student body at University of Texas. And then somehow or another, I've heard it was either a love triangle, as what supposedly happened with Josepha Johnson, which was LBJ's sister, and Doug Kinzer. And Mac walked in, I think, into a country club. I mean, he outright murdered Doug Kinzer. And that's public record. There was open trial in Texas about it. And he was sentenced to 5 years. LBJ got him off of all of that, and he was LBJ's guy from then on out.
What a week, guys. Good Friday to you. Hopefully you're getting ready for the weekend. A lot to get to. The president, though, what a week. Standing up for American workers, businesses, market access. I know everyone's going, oh, I can't believe this. Yeah, and keep kicking a can down the road or fight for fairness. I showed you guys this yesterday in the panel discussion. 170 countries. Here's what they pay. Here's what we're going to charge them. What can you be against? Why are you against this? Great show coming your way. We've got two great guests, actually. So John Carney is the editor at Breitbart that covers economics and finance, and he's going to give us his take on how things are playing on. And then later, Shane Stevens, he has uncovered tapes that his grandfather had recording what appears to be a plot by LBJ aides to assassinate Kennedy. We're going to play some of that for you tonight and give you an inside story that nobody else is talking about. But before I get to that, I want to show you a video that the White House put out, and we'll put the links in our bio to show you in case you want to see the whole thing. But here's a good explanation of what's going on, a great discussion that they had over there between Stephen Miller, Taylor Budowich, Caroline Levitt, and Jamieson Greer, the U.S. trade rep. Take a look at some of this.
Stephen just highlighted some of these. First of all, we're doing a reciprocal tariff, right? This is a golden rule for the golden age. We treat them how they treat us. As Stephen mentioned, we expect that those countries that treat us very poorly, where they have documented behavior over many years of whether it's high tariff levels or extreme trade barriers or taxes or other kind of charges that discriminate against our companies or burden our companies, they are naturally going to have higher rates, because to achieve the kind of reciprocity we need, you have to have a higher rate. And then there are going to be other countries that have a lower rate because maybe they have a different level of unfairness or non-reciprocity. And we expect that there will be a global minimum on all countries, because we have to deal with this deficit. We also want to make sure that there's no cheating, that we don't have people going from one jurisdiction to another to try to get around the tariff. We need to make sure that we have no loopholes in this policy, because as Stephen points out, it's an emergency. The urgency of what's happening right now cannot be overstated. That's why the president on day one announced he wanted us to look into it. We looked into it over the past couple of months, and we're taking action the day after we reported back to him. I have right here a book full of all of the unfair trade practices by our top 100 partners. We published it just a couple days ago.
Take a look at that. I mean, all of those trade practices, unfair. A great conversation that they had. We're going to break this all down with John Carney of Breitbart. He's their economics editor. He's going to give us a take on how they're doing and what this means for all of us, including our own wallets. Before we get to that, though, you guys, I tell you, I've been talking about this for a while, about a wellness journey, but it all starts with sleep, right? Gut health and sleep. If you don't get a good night's sleep, so there's something that I have found that has just literally made an unbelievable change in my life. That is Beam's Dream Powder. I always hold up these things, so I want you to know. I take it, I use it. These are the empty bags. You can see they've been down. I'm on to my third or fourth bag already. I love it. That's the cocoa cinnamon flavor. Oh, so good. It is proudly founded here in America. It's run by people who share our values. They work hard, integrity, they deliver results. It's science-backed. I'm telling you, I take one scoop before bed, put in some water in the microwave for 30 to 40 seconds, and it tastes so good. But what's even better is it's what it's in it. I used to take different pills to help me sleep, fall asleep, stay asleep. This thing's got it all. Magnesium, L-theanine, reishi, apigen, and melatonin all in one delicious. So it's all natural. I fall asleep within like 30 minutes. I don't wake up until it's time to get up, and I feel refreshed and ready to go. I'm telling you, athletes, professionals all around the world take this because it works. If I miss it, I can tell the difference. It is that good. Trust me, find one of the flavors. There's the brownie, the peppermint. They're so good. It has already saved 17.5 million nights sleep for our fellow Americans. So here's the deal. Beam is giving my listeners the ultimate Patriot discount of 40% off. So you can try the best-selling Dream Powder, get 40% off. Pick the flavor that you think is best. I do love that cinnamon cocoa. The brownie's pretty good too. Go to shopbeam.com/Spicer, code word Spicer. So shopbeam.com/Spicer and use code word Spicer for 40% off. This is a great American company, and you're investing in your own wellness and health. Check it out. All right, real quick, on April 9th, it's a Wednesday night, 8 o'clock. Speaking of wellness, I'm talking about the company that I'm buying all my products from now. Cleaning supplies, deodorant, soap, wipes that I use here. Everything I've switched over to a great American company, and I'm going to tell you about it in a private Zoom that I'm hosting on Wednesday at April 9th. If you want to join, just text RSVP, just those 4 words, 4 letters, RSVP to 276-500-1185, 276-500-1185. All right, without further ado, bring in John Carney. He is the finance and economics editor at Breitbart. John, thanks for joining us. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sean.
All right, so how do you guys at Breitbart view the rollout so far? What do you think about how the president rolled this thing out and how it's being received?
So I thought that the rollout was very good. They explained what they were doing very well. Trump was very emphatic at saying, yeah, this is something new we're doing. We are breaking the world trade system, and we're launching it on a new system. However, I do think that what they announced was pretty complicated. And at first, people couldn't figure out really even what exactly was happening. I spent several hours actually trying to find out, which tariffs were additive on top of what. There's a 10% level. Are the reciprocal tariffs on top of that? It got misreported in a lot of places. So I think they could have probably been a little better prepared at making really clear what the tariff levels were going to be and how they were calculated. But, over the course of the coming days, the market will figure out exactly how these things are calculated. But it wasn't perfect, but it was pretty darn good for such a revolutionary change in something as big as the global trading system.
Were you surprised at how President Trump, I got the list here, calculated these numbers? So for China, they tariff us, including currency manipulation and other non-tariff barriers, 67%. And he's going to hit them. I know that this is in addition to some other stuff, but 34%. The EU, 39%. We're going to hit them with 20. I mean, he came in at about half.
Right.
And I found that shocking because he keeps using the word reciprocal, but then it's not entirely reciprocal what we're doing to them.
Right. So one of the things was that they faced a very complicated task, which is all of the hundreds of countries around the world have thousands of various tariff levels. They have rates on all sorts of different things. So you were really looking at millions of tariffs that we were trying to assess, and then the non-tariff barriers as well, trying to assign a numeric value to figure out what would reciprocity be. They did a simplified version of that. They basically looked at the total exports a country sends to us and our trade deficit and did the calculation based on that. That number, however, came in really high. When they did that, call it a proxy for trade barriers, it came in really high, and they said, let's not hit Europe with a 39% tariff. Let's give it a 20% tariff. I think that is, Trump said he felt bad trying to do exactly what he thinks they're doing to us. So he did it, halfway. And I think also there was the additional 10% floor tariff that exists. So that brings the average tariff rate for the US up to around 20% from down at 9%. I think if they went with the full, so that Europe got 39% rather than 20% tariff rate, that tariff rate would have been much higher. And I don't think they wanted to go there.
And you don't think they wanted to go there because Trump just didn't want to inflict that much pain, or he didn't think he'd get them to come down? I mean, I think that, I know this is wonky, but you get this, is that like, it's one thing to say your tariff is 10, you take it, we're going to go to 10, and if you want to come down, we'll both come down. But when they started adding these non-tariff barriers like the VAT, which is what Europe uses as their tax system, I don't know how you place a number on that. Like, so how does Europe say, how are you valuing our VAT? You guys have 50 state taxes and you want us to, you subsidize certain things, so what are we supposed to do? I think that to me is kind of the kicker, is that, like, do you think that they have set themselves up for success, I guess is the best way to do this, at getting another country to say, fine, we can get that number lower?
I do think they have set themselves up for success in this. I think that just doing it mechanically on like, okay, here's your tariff, but we're going to ignore the non-tariff barriers actually wouldn't have been very productive. Remember, ultimately what the goal here is to achieve a more balanced trade with the rest of the world. We don't like the particular non-tariff barriers and we don't like the tariffs, but those are really means to an end that countries use to create their giant surpluses that then the US has been forced to absorb. What we're saying is we're not going to absorb these surpluses anymore. We're going to put a tariff on you. If you start to bring down your tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers, and those result in our trade deficits and trade surpluses coming closer, then we will lower the reciprocal tariff. So this is like I said, it's a proxy for tariff levels and trade barriers. And the way they can fix that is by fixing the things that their country does that create this giant trade imbalance.
So this list that the White House put out at the Rose Garden ceremony is 8 pages long, like 170 countries. Was there a country that you were either surprised didn't get penalized as much, or got penalized too much, or didn't get the treatment at all?
So what I found actually surprising at first when I looked at the list was that the UK was on the list. We don't have a big trade deficit with the UK, but I realized that that's just because there's a 10% floor. Basically, Trump is putting an import tax. He is raising revenue from the federal government that should then be used, by the way, to cut taxes on domestic businesses, domestic individuals. We could use it to slash capital gains taxes. We could use it to cut payroll taxes, but he's putting a border tax on. That's the 10% level. That surprised me at first because I didn't realize that they were creating what I'll call the good guy list. The good guy list is everybody who pays 10%. They are not running unfair trade practice against the US. Everybody else is. I did get some questions from people. Why aren't Canada and Mexico on the list? Well, we're having a separate trade negotiation with Canada. Some people said, why isn't Russia on the list? Well, we don't trade with Russia. That's why Russia's not on the list.
Same thing with Iran.
Exactly. There's no North Korea on the list. Okay. So we don't, the countries we have already cut off trade relations, we don't have a tariff on them. We just don't do business with them. So, but of course, the Russia stuff, people were saying, oh no.
Of course.
Yeah. It was, so I thought actually the list worked out about how I would expect. I was surprised at how high, like, the tariff on Vietnam is. That, it got a very, very high tariff rate.
46%. 46%.
Yeah. So, and they said, that's half of what we were calculating they're doing to us. A part of that, I think, that what's going on there is that China actually uses Vietnam as a way around our China tariffs.
Right.
A lot of clothing that comes from Vietnam is actually made from cotton made by Uyghur slaves that we have sanctions on. They send it to Vietnam and it gets around our tariffs. So that's one of the reasons we need to tariff Vietnam in order to really tariff China.
So the thing that's interesting about the UK example that you brought up to me is, and this goes to like another question that I want to follow up on, but the goal, as Trump explained it, was reciprocal. You screw us, we'll screw you back, right? You take yours down, we stop doing ours. I get that. I think that's pure fairness, and I don't understand why enough people weren't backing him. But if you do the floor thing that you were talking about, what does that say? Because if you're the UK, you go, wait a second, guys, why are we getting slapped with a 10% tariff when we're one of the good guys? We don't do that to you. Does that undermine diplomatic relations when you're basically saying, hey, you said you were just going to do reciprocal and now we're getting hit by this?
So I don't think countries should look at it that way. I think they should say, look, the U.S. runs a
But they
giant-
are.
Some of them are, by the way. Some of them are actually saying the UK is actually taking a much more measured approach to this than, and Australia is as well, than the EU. They, I think, recognize that the US we run giant budget deficits. We have a corporate tax rate that's higher than a lot of the world. And it used to be much higher than a lot of the world. So we're looking at the 10% as a floor. And by the way, the UK does have its own tariffs. And I actually don't think those tariffs are all bad. Sometimes countries want to do things like preserve their fishing industry. So if they want to have tariffs on, fish from the US, that seems totally reasonable to me. The 10% tariff is not overly burdensome. And I bet that can come down. I bet that can be negotiated down if countries say, look, that's really bad for us. Is there any way we can get a lower one? Yeah, possibly we can get a lower one. But the way I would put it is it's like the 10% is more like the admission ticket to being able to sell in the US market. It's the cover charge. You can come in, but you're going to pay your set 10%.
Okay, that's fine. And I get that. But doesn't that go to like what the goal was? Because I felt like there was a little bit of mixed messaging over the last week, which was, like I said, I am all for 100%. Why are we getting screwed by, our farmers, ranchers, manufacturers, service providers? We can't go into your market without paying a hefty tariff, but you come into ours. That's just stupid. That's not even, right. That's ridiculous. So, but if you start going in the other direction and they started to talk about deficit reduction and, hey, we want to use that, then that's a whole different kettle of fish that they're actually talking about. It's like, which is your goal? Is it to raise money to help pay down the debt or the deficit, or is it to gain access? Because if you're negotiating, I would assume that the goal is to get rid of the tariff. That's how Trump explained it. I want to say, great, Vietnam, you take your 90% tariff down to 10 and we'll take ours down. But if you're in the back of your mind, you're really going, but the more that they keep this on, we get to use money to bring down the deficit. You can't have both, I don't think.
So the way I would put it is, one, this is obviously a compromise. There are people in the administration who really want to use tariffs to raise revenue, and to use that then to give tax relief to Americans. There are people who say, we also really need to use it to try to get a better deal on trade for the rest of the US. And then Trump also has a third tariff. So there's revenue tariffs. There's what I'll call like trade negotiation tariffs. And then the third one was diplomacy tariffs, where he tells, Colombia, you're going to take back your illegal aliens or else you're going to get a tariff. If you buy Venezuelan oil, you're going to get a tariff. So there's three different types of tariffs that the administration is deploying here. The 10%, I think, is really supposed to be a revenue tariff, and it's supposed to send a message to the world like, we don't think this treats you bad. You have a VAT. You charge our guys money when we sell into your country. The 10% tariff can be looked at as a kind of VAT for imports. The reciprocal tariff is the one that we're using to try to get countries that treat us badly to change things. So I think tariffs can actually do all of these functions at once.
He used these emergency powers to do that versus, and I know this is wonky, but there was a whole potential to do what they call 301. You do an investigation, you find out how the trade practice, that would have taken time, and then that would have been a whole separate negotiation with each country. The downside to the emergency, as far as I'm concerned, is that it's probably a more vulnerable tactic when it comes to the courts, that people can say there's no emergency, you're not applying this fairly or equitably, and we're going to go after it. Do you think that they're on solid ground when it comes to the judicial review of this of this tactic that they have used?
Let me reframe that a little. I think the judges will stop everything that Donald Trump tries to do. And so you could be on the solidest, legal ground. You could do the 301 investigation, and the judges will say you did it wrong. You're not allowed to do this. We're going to stop you. We've seen that, every day. There's a new district judge somewhere in America who puts a nationwide order that stops the Trump administration from doing something. So I'm not that concerned about the legal trouble. What I actually think the bigger risk of doing it the way they're doing it through the emergency power is that the next president can just cancel it instantly. Just say, okay, I declare the emergency over. At least if you do an investigation, the next administration has to do an investigation themselves. I would prefer Congress to actually step up and start doing its job. Under the Constitution, they're supposed to set tax rates, including tariff rates. So rather than having delegated all of this authority to the US president, which they have, the president isn't doing anything he's not supposed to do. But I would rather have Congress sit there and debate tariff rates.
Do you really want to do that? I worry about these guys going through every country, every tariff rate. They can't even pass a budget. And I don't know that I really need every country worried about what these guys aren't or are going to.
Yeah, that is the counter argument that like they can't pass a budget. Republicans are already talking about raising individual tax rates. Like they're not very functional. The counter argument to that is maybe the reason Congress is so dysfunctional is because they've been able to delegate so much of their actual authority of things that matter to the executive branch that if they actually had to make laws responsibly and do things like set the tariff rate and, instead of punting regulations all to the agencies, decide things for themselves, maybe they'd behave more responsibly. Maybe we would care more when we voted for people because we would know what they did mattered. Right now, they delegate everything. So who cares?
It's like, who cares? You guys don't do anything anyway. Yeah. It's kind of true because it really does. Right now, you're like, I'm voting for an R or a D, and it's just got to be a warm body. Right. So let's just play this out for a second. In the coming days, I have believed that it's going to be like people getting in the queue, right? So, hi, I'm from Vietnam. I'd like to talk to you. And then, by the way, is anyone right behind you? Because it's like a bathroom line at a concert. Right. They're going to line up and just be like, can I get up? Can I cut the line? I'm next. Trying to negotiate their tariff rate down. As far as you can pick up, is that how you think the process is going to work? That it's going to be one-offs here and there? Or is there going to be a more systematic approach to how countries are going to, or industries? Because I know, you mentioned a couple of these, but like some of these industries care. Like, how is that going to how do you think it manifests itself?
So I think what's going to happen is there is going to be a process where countries rush to try to get tariff relief first before anybody else. One, because that'll give them an economic advantage against the rest of the world if they do that. Two, the Trump administration has kind of hinted at this, that they will treat those who come to them first better than those who come to them last. That is, a very age-old, I'll call it like a New York negotiation. I'm from New York, a New York negotiating tactic, right? Like this is the way investment bankers do stuff. This is the way Wall Street handles this stuff, which is,
it's also the way like judges, not judges, like prosecutors. They're like, you ever see that like Law and Order? They're like, right, first one to get the deal, talks, gets the best deal.
Absolutely. So come to us first. You'll get a better deal than the guys who come to us last. If you're reluctant, you won't. I wouldn't be surprised though if we see countries actually try to team up and get a better deal for themselves. So you could have, a Southeast Asia pact that says
like an APAC block,
right? We want a better deal for all of us. Lower our tariffs. Here's what we're offering you as a group. That might make it less painful for them, and also might actually speed along the process because instead of waiting in line as a single country, you're like, I can offer you 5 countries that are going to give you a better deal.
You know what? I actually think I will. That to me is beautiful. You get like all the ASEAN countries together and say, hey, let's get it. Let's do this as a block. And they can say that they got 12 of us. Actually, I think that's brilliant. So let's kind of flip this the other way. If you listen to a lot of the folks in the media and the commentators or whatever, we're all going to pay more instantly. And what I don't get about that, because I was listening to a guy, this is actually the perfect illustration for me. They were interviewing a car dealer the other day. And they said, how are tariffs? He said, everything on the lot is going to stay the same price because that's what we pay. If the prices go up in the future, we may pass them along. And again, I joked when everyone said prices are going to go up immediately because I'm like, why? If you have something there, it shouldn't go up because it didn't cost you anything. But do you think, let's start with this, that when you go to the supermarket or Home Depot in the next couple of weeks, will the average consumer see a price hike on things that they're buying?
No, first of all, definitely not at the grocery store. Remember, even though we might buy, olive oil from Italy, most of our groceries are domestic products. They're not only domestic, they're pretty local. You're not buying, avocados come from Mexico, roses come from Colombia, but most of the things you see in bananas come not from the US, but most of the things you see in your grocery store are domestically produced. So take groceries off the table. But in places like Home Depot, no, those places. So Home Depot is in, fierce competition with Lowe's. That the car dealer who might think, oh, I'm going to pass on the extra cost to my customer, has to deal with the guy down the street who's going to try to take a lower margin to steal his market share. Competition will actually prevent a lot of the price of the tariff from being passed on to the consumer, because again, like if you're Walmart and you say, well, we got to raise our prices 10%, you know who's waiting in the wings? Target. Target will say, well, we'll raise our prices. Not at all. Come shop. In fact, we're going to put stuff on sale to try to steal market share from the people who raised the price on you. So competition should hold down. There probably will be some price increase. I'm not saying there will be none, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere near as extreme what people expect. We're not going to see a sudden uplift in prices.
One of the reasons that they give for like things not going to hell in a handbasket is that everyone thinks that Trump's going to cave, maybe this weekend or whatever. I don't think that's the case. I'm quite the opposite. I believe that he's been talking about this tariffs since the 1980s. And I guess, so once people realize that, maybe it's Monday or Tuesday when we get past the initial, threat of all of this. Do you think that, I also think, I know your wheelhouse is like the economy and stuff, but like politically, I wonder if the media doesn't, like, how like the Today Show and all these guys are going to go look for those examples. This, to your point, the avocado, maybe not the greatest one, but this car cost $5,000. Now it's costing $7,000. Like how many, like if they're robbed of the examples, because to your point, like I think the average person goes to the grocery store, right? And they look around, they go, hey, eggs are cheaper, bananas are the same price. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, I wonder how the media is going to play this if they can't find the examples to hype the problem.
Yeah, I mean, look, they're definitely going to find some examples, right? They're definitely going to find something that somebody suddenly can't afford, and they'll hype that. So there will be negative examples going on, and we'll read endlessly about them. And some of them.
Give me an example. Like if you had to say right now, look, here are some industries or some products that will likely see a price hike. What would they be?
Maybe some apparel, like clothing, I think actually may see some price hikes, because it's not a high margin business. Other than Nike sneakers probably won't go up in price because they're already too expensive. But other things like cheaper price clothing, a t-shirt that's made in Malaysia may go up in price because the margins are quite thin. And there's not a lot of domestic competition for that. So in other words, we don't make a lot of it. So there's not a lot of alternatives to turn to. But I actually think a lot of that may be quite short-lived, because what you'll see is some prices go up and consumers may bulk. They may say, you know what, I'm not willing to pay that much. And so stores end up with extra inventory. They put it on sale and some of the prices come down. This happens all the time, by the way. This is how, prices are set in the economy. Stores are constantly pushing to raise a price a little bit to see if they can get away with it, see if it costs them market share. And if it doesn't, then they keep the price at the higher level. If it does, they lower it back down. This is, the process of discounting that we see all of the time. So I think we're going to see, prices go up, prices go down. I think it's a little hard to tell. I think things like the iPhone, which is going to face a giant tax in terms of the China tariff, I don't think that's going to go up in price very much at all.
Really?
Because it's so expensive. They really, they can't charge 57% more for a iPhone
Yeah, but they also got to worry about shareholders. So either they squeeze their margin, right? So let's say the iPhone's $1,000 and let's just say it's a 100% profit. So they've got 500 to play with, but their shareholders don't want to see the share price go down. I mean, so right, don't they have to figure out where that balance is?
They do. That's what they're going to do. I think that they will either decide, okay, we got to figure out how to make it cheaper in China so that we don't get hit by as much of the, so the tariff doesn't eat as much of our profit away, or we need to ship it into a lower tariff area. That could be the US, or it could be Ecuador. I mean, if you look at that list, there are a lot of countries that could benefit tremendously because they're going to get a much lower tariff rate than China. And I've said for a long time, Sean, that a lot of like our border problems, our problems with Mexico, people coming up from Central and South America are actually partly caused by the fact that jobs that we would have expected to go to our neighbors to the south went across the Pacific Ocean to China. Moving those jobs here will help.
So you brought up China. He has really gone. I mean, it's like now over 50% the tariff rate that's going to affect China. We get a lot of crap from China, a lot of crap, like the cheap goods, knockoff stuff, whatever. I actually am hopeful that more manufacturing goes back. I've got a whole separate discussion that I want to have about like our manufacturing base, because I think I showed this at the beginning of the show. We are screwed if we don't address our manufacturing base and how it's gone and China's has risen. How do you think? I mean, China's talked about retaliating. How do you think we deal with the cost of goods in China? Like what is, if you could put a crystal ball in front of you and say, show me what the world looks like in 3 months with respect to China and how we trade with them, how they retaliated, what we got out of this. What does this look like 3 months from down the road?
So I think what China is going to try to do is find another economy, namely the EU, to dump its excess production upon. They out of 57%. And by the way, the tariff may go even higher because they buy oil from Venezuela. So they may get hit with another 25% tariff on top of the tariffs that they have. So they could go above 100% on goods from China. So China cannot reform its economic system enough to not run a trade surplus against someone. Their entire economic surplus their system demands that they produce more goods than they can consume, that they find other countries willing to take the excess production. That's the only way they keep their population employed. So they will, if the US declares itself off limits to the Chinese surplus, which is what we are doing, they will look for somebody else. That may be Europe. Europe can decide, do they want to lose their manufacturing base to China instead of the US, losing it to China? Or they can join with the US and say, we're not going to support China's economic system doing this to the rest of the world. I think that's what happens. I think the rest of the world basically is going to carve out China. I don't think that happens over 3 months, but I think it happens over the next 3 years, that we will see the world say, China cannot continue the way it is, but it also can't change. So we're going to have trading blocks, and we're going
I feel like remember the whole Huawei thing where everybody was warning about these computers but yet Europe was like, yeah, but they're cheap. And so maybe I agree. I hope you're right. My concern is that they're like, hey, we get cheap access to goods now that the US is doing this. But what does it look like though in your mind for the US consumer? Like in the interim, all this stuff, what's the thing called Temu that people buy stuff on? Whatever. I mean, like, what does that look like? You're somebody who buys all the tchotchke stuff or all the I mean, there's so much stuff when you open labels from all over the house, made in China. Like, how is this going to affect the U.S. consumer?
I think that the U.S. consumer there is going to be an adjustment period in which, particularly things like Temu, like we're ending the de minimis exemption where you didn't have to pay any tariff on shipments under $800. So like very small shipments, there was no tariff. We even before the recent announcement, we were actually announcing that, no, we're putting on the tariff on that. I think there will be some dislocation. I think that actually one of the reasons we saw the stock market reaction to this is because people are realizing this is a big deal. It's not, I don't want to pretend like there isn't going to be some dislocation and disorder that's going to happen from this. There will be, but sometimes that's necessary. One of the things I pointed out to people is people said, oh, the stock market went way down when Donald Trump gave his speech. You know what else it went way down? When Jay Powell announced that he was going to have to raise interest rates fiercely to fight inflation in Jackson Hole. Was that a mistake? No. People say, well, if it was good for the country, why did the stock market go down? Stock market went down when Jay Powell said that. Stock market went down when Greenspan talked about irrational exuberance, right? Sometimes you have to issue a corrective that will be bad in the short term for stock market values, but is actually, and might be uncomfortable for consumers, but is actually good for a longer term.
I agree. John Carney, finance and economics editor at Breitbart News. I appreciate you joining us. Enjoy the weekend. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Sean.
You bet. What a great discussion. I think you walk into the weekend a lot smarter now because of John Carney, don't you? All right, I want to get to this discussion because Shane Stevens has these tapes that his grandfather kept that are conversations with LBJ aides about the JFK assassination. I don't think you're going to hear this anywhere else. I'm so excited to share this with you. Without further ado, Shane Stevens. Hey, Shane, thanks for joining us. I'm excited to tell me about these tapes that you have. What is the background of what's on them?
Sean, so thanks for having me on. It's an honor. I've always been a big fan of yours. But as far as the tapes, these go back. I mean, there's legend and history about these tapes supposedly being around, and basically what kept my granddad alive. I started hearing about them probably in the mid 80s, late 80s, when I was, early teens, something along those lines. And there was always some speculation in our head and doubt that, does he really have the tapes, or is he just saying that so that the folks behind the assassination, LBJ, don't go after him? But sure enough, in probably 2015-ish, about 10 years ago, these tapes surfaced, and me, my cousins, a few folks knew about them, and we've kept them in safekeeping. And they've actually kind of tried to release them a time or two, but everybody was afraid of them and, speculative of them, skeptical. So finally, we've got them out as of about 2-3 months ago, and now it's all over the place.
So what is it that's on them? We're going to play a little for the audience in a second, but I just give me a sense, like, what is it that we're hearing on these tapes, and who's in them, and what are they suggesting?
Well, Saul, it's been a pretty touch and go situation. Lyndon and I have had quite a few unpleasant words here lately over the deal that he hired Mike Wallace to assassinate the president. It's been hectic in every way, but we've lived through it this far, and I guess we'll continue to do so. Lyndon should have never issued that order to Mike, but we've had our differences, and I'm a true blue to Lyndon, as I've always been, and tried to carry out every order that he'd ever given me. But this is one I'll probably never be able to forget.
All right, so you'll hear, a couple of voices, and it's just old West Texas dialect as far as how they're talking. One of them, the guy that starts out, is my granddad, Billie Sol Estes. And, most of the stuff you can look up if somebody wants to follow along with Sean's program and, do your own research, pull it up in ChatGPT, Grok, online. Billie Sol Estes, one of the biggest funders, donors to LBJ, and I think was tied in with kickbacks, pay for play with him. That's my granddad. And then Clifton Carter. He was LBJ's right-hand man, his bag man, going way back into the 40s. And then even after the assassination was still tied with Kennedy, he is LBJ's right-hand man. You can look him up, Clifton C. Carter. And it's my granddad and Cliff Carter talking in the early 80s, which was this short time span of when my granddad had gotten out of prison and when before Cliff died, because Cliff died the same year. So it's within about a 5-6 month span that they would have recorded this. And this is just one that we've uncovered. There's
And
supposed
what
to
are
be
they
more that
saying?
were.
So, first of all, what was your grandfather in prison for?
His court case was the very first ever televised court case. The Kennedys sent down supposedly is over 50 FBI agents to investigate my granddad. They weren't necessarily going after my granddad. They were ultimately going after LBJ. And so, if anybody's familiar with the political climate at the times, there was a big bit of turmoil between the Kennedys and the Johnson camp back in the early 60s. So, they were ultimately trying to root him out. They knew that he was up to nefarious activity, and they were working on really potentially a PR campaign to get him off of the ticket with them. So, they were going after his cronies or the Texas Mafia, the Texas Syndicate, which was a bunch of wealthy Texas businessmen, oil men. You know, you had the Hunt family, you had Brown and Root, you had attorneys, and my granddad was he was supposedly worth 400 to maybe 600 million in the 60s.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's real money, real money.
So what are they saying on this tape? The two of them are chatting, and what are they saying on these tapes? And also, are they intentionally recording themselves?
Yeah, so a gentleman sent me a bunch of information. I didn't know if Cliff Carter knew he was being recorded or not, but a gentleman sent me some stuff. It was testimony from my granddad when he was trying to release this stuff in the mid 80s, but he couldn't get immunity. So he said that Cliff Carter was aware of the recordings that they had of him, LBJ, and the hitman before the assassination, and that Cliff was aware of this one, and they were both basically using them to protect their own lives, because after they started seeing this hitman and LBJ ordering murders and people to get killed, they were like, we probably better look out for ourselves.
Right. So on the tape, are they coordinating or discussing the assassination of JFK?
So they are openly discussing the assassination of JFK, to some degree what happened, who was behind it, who was involved. And I think it's a somewhat of a myopic view. I don't know that they're discussing everybody that was involved, but they're certainly pointing the finger at a couple of people.
Like?
LBJ and the hitman Malcolm Wallace.
And who's Malcolm Wallace? Just a random dude that they hired to carry out an assassination, or does he have any connection to Kennedy or LBJ?
Deep ties to LBJ, and that goes back to some Texas history, to where he was apparently a brilliant guy, very intelligent. Was over, I believe, the student body at University of Texas, and then somehow or another, I've heard it was either a love triangle, as what supposedly happened with Josepha Johnson, which was LBJ's sister, and a golf pro, I believe, or tennis pro, Doug Kinzer. And Mac walked in, I think, into a country club and smoked him. I mean, he outright murdered Doug Kinzer. And that's public record. There was an open trial in Texas about it. And he was sentenced to 5 years, which seems very light. And then he never served any time. LBJ got him off of all of that. And he was LBJ's guy from then on out. The real story supposedly is the reason he killed him is he was dating Josepha, and he was trying to blackmail LBJ, and LBJ wasn't having it.
Has anyone from the government, in light of all this talk about the JFK files and since whenever you came into possession of them, has anyone ever come to you and said, can we hear them? Can we listen to them? Can we take possession of them?
No, it's been...
has anyone from Congress? I mean, like all these people who now are investigating this, no one's contacted you?
I am in touch with, I think it's Anna Paulina Luna.
Right, yeah. I was going to ask, from Florida.
Yeah, I reached out to her executive assistant or one of her staff members. I was connected with them. I don't know that I've heard back, but oddly, I mean, not a lot different than the Warren Commission, where, there were 22 police officers that heard gunfire from the grassy knoll. Those people aren't interviewed. And so I think there's still a real intent to suppress the truth. And in time, I trust that this will get further. And, folks like you putting their show out and putting this out there further just empowers the public to use their voice. And I encourage everybody who listens to this, does their own research, and comes to rational conclusions, reach out to your representatives and hammer them and tell them that y'all want the truth, that we're tired of the government suppressing it.
So Shane, you said that your grandfather was probably concerned about his well-being, because of the LBJ folks. Is there any sense that any of his kin are concerned about you putting the word out about what may or may not have happened?
Yeah, and there's one individual, I dearly love that was frustrated with it, and just feels like the past needs to stay the past. They had to live it and be a part of it and experience it. Their phones were tapped for pretty much the duration of their life, as long as I think my granddad was alive. And, they had folks listening in on their conversations, and it was a tough time for them. So some folks that are closer to it, they want it to stay in the past, as to where, other, like the second generation, third generation down that have kind of lived under this, I think it's freeing to them to get this out and get this kind of weight off of our shoulders and our back, and potentially help to restore some honor there. Because obviously when folks are attacked in a political setting, they're going to assassinate their character and try and demolish them. And they did that same thing back in the 60s to my granddad. So it's mixed within the family.
So you mentioned Anna Paulina Luna. She's been chairing this effort to get all the files released. The president, a couple weeks ago, whatever it was, 10 days ago, released all of these files. Is it safe to say that you don't believe that that's an accurate, full picture of what happened in terms of the Kennedy assassination?
There were a couple of interesting things that came out. I've heard that that's not the full release. It sounds like there's still a lot more documents. I've also heard that there was quite a bit that was being shredded and released. And so even prior to the release, some folks were asking me on various podcasts, what do you think we're going to find? And my opinion at the time was, I think it's probably 20% that we may find something that's revealing and has an abundance of new information, but 80% chance that we're not going to find anything new, because if they went through the lengths of setting up a fake commission in the Warren Commission, appointing LBJ's enemies to be the ones that are investigating his assassination, outright lying about several things that have already been caught and verified, and then killing a bunch of people. I've heard some of these experts that have researched this whole case. In the tape, my granddad talks about 17 killings just surrounding his court case. And some of these experts on the assassination have said that there's been upwards of 100 killings, murders, to keep this covered up. So you don't go around killing 100 people and creating fake commissions to leave a smoking gun sitting within boxes inside of an agency. I just don't see that happening. So I don't think we get the full picture. I think we have to use logic, deductive reasoning, and look into the surrounding circumstances and the testimony of people that were not interviewed, were not considered as part of the piece, even though they were there. And I mean, just even looking at the circumstantial components of Time Magazine had the Zipruder film for 13 years before they released it. And that's the one where it shows Kennedy's head popping back from a gunshot. And, you look at the experts on bullets and trajectory, start looking at all of that, and none of it makes sense. Right. So the way that makes sense is you start to look at this and then about 15 other pieces of information and then dig, and you can figure it out.
Right. Well, Shane, I appreciate you sharing your family's information with us. This is unbelievable Startling news. So thank you for being here. I wish everyone a great weekend. Thanks for being with us on the Sean Spicer Show. We've got a great week lined up with the fallout of the tariffs and how people are reacting to it. We'll cover it all next week. So thanks for being with us. Make sure you tune back in on Monday. We'll have it all for you. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday. Thanks for being on the Sean Spicer Show. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.